The Oakwood Hotel had always been a place of whispers and shadows. Built in the 1920s, it stood as a silent sentinel on the outskirts of town, its Victorian architecture a stark contrast to the modern buildings surrounding it. I'd been working the night shift there for about 6 months, and I'd gotten used to the eerie silence that settles over the lobby in the early hours. The creaking floorboards, the flickering lights, the occasional inexplicable cold spot. They had all become part of my nightly routine. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. It was a Tuesday, just after 2 a.m. The hotel was nearly empty, with only a handful of guests scattered throughout its 4 floors. I was at the front desk, idly scrolling through my phone, when I heard the front door open. The sound echoed through the empty lobby, making me jump. I looked up, expecting to see a late-night guest stumbling in from the bar. Instead, I saw nothing. The door was wide open, swinging gently in the night breeze, but there was no one there. I frowned, thinking maybe it was just the wind. We'd been having some strange weather lately, unseasonably cold for September. I got up to close it, but as I approached, I felt a sudden chill. It was like walking into a freezer. The hair on my arm stood on end, and I could see my breath misting in the air. I shivered, quickly shut the door, and hurried back to my desk. That's when I noticed the guest book. It was open, and there was a new entry. In spidery, old-fashioned handwriting, it read, "Room 237, checking in." The ink was still wet, glistening in the dim light of the lobby. My heart started racing. I hadn't checked anyone in. I hadn't even seen anyone. I looked at the key rack behind me. The key to room 237 was gone. With shaking hands, I picked up the phone to call security. But before I could dial, I heard a noise from the elevator. It was moving, heading up to the 2nd floor, where room 237 was located. I knew I should investigate, but fear kept me rooted to the spot. I sat there, listening to the sounds of the old hotel, the creaking of floorboards, the rattling of pipes, and then footsteps coming from upstairs, directly above me. They weren't normal footsteps. They were slow, dragging, as if something heavy was being pulled across the floor, and they were getting closer to the stairs. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran out from behind the desk, heading for the front door, but as I reached for the handle, I heard a voice behind me. "Leaving so soon?" it rasped. I turned slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. There, at the foot of the stairs, was a figure. It was tall, unnaturally so, and thin as a skeleton. Its skin was a sickly gray, hanging loosely from its frame. But its eyes, God, its eyes were alive with a horrible, hungry light. "I've just checked in," it said, its mouth stretching into a grotesque parody of a smile. "Won't you show me to my room?" I screamed then, a sound of pure terror that echoed through the empty lobby. I fumbled with the door, finally wrenching it open and running out into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap to the face, but I didn't stop running. I could hear it behind me, those slow, dragging footsteps getting closer and closer. I ran down the empty street, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I didn't stop until I reached the police station several blocks away. The officer on duty looked at me like I was crazy when I burst in, babbling about ghosts and haunted hotels. But something in my eyes must have convinced him I wasn't just some drunk or junkie. He called for backup, and soon 2 patrol cars were heading to the Oakwood. I sat in the station, wrapped in a shock blanket, waiting for news. An hour passed, then 2. Finally, the officers returned. They found nothing out of the ordinary, they said. No sign of disturbance in room 237. No entry in the guest book. Even the security cameras showed nothing but me, sitting at the desk, then suddenly running out as if chased by the devil himself. They wrote it off as stress, maybe a vivid nightmare. They suggested I take some time off, see a therapist. But I knew what I had seen, what I had heard. I quit that job the next day. I couldn't bear the thought of going back to that hotel, of facing another night shift. But the experience haunted me. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing's face, heard its rasping voice. I started doing research, digging into the hotel's history, and what I found chilled me to the bone. In 1954, a guest had died in room 237. He was a traveling salesman, found dead in his bed of an apparent heart attack. But the coroner's report noted something strange. The man's body showed signs of extreme terror. His face was frozen in a mask of fear, his hands clenched so tightly that his nails had cut into his palms. And the strangest thing? The report mentioned that the man's possessions were found packed neatly by the door, as if he had been preparing to check out. In the middle of the night, I've tried to move on with my life. I found a new job in a brightly lit office with no dark corners or creaking floorboards. But sometimes in my dreams, I'm back there, in that lobby with its faded carpets and flickering lights. And I hear those slow, dragging footsteps coming down the stairs, getting closer and closer. I wake up screaming every time. And I know, deep in my bones, that somewhere out there, in some lonely hotel, a night clerk is about to experience the most terrifying night of their life. Because that thing, whatever it was, is still out there, still checking in, still hungry, and sooner or later, it's going to find its next victim. The Pinewood Inn stands at the edge of town, a Victorian relic surrounded by encroaching modernity. Its faded grandeur speaks of better days, of a time when it was the crown jewel of our little mountain community. I've been working the night shift here for 3 years now, and I've grown accustomed to its quirks, the creaky floorboards, the temperamental heating system, the way shadows seem to linger just a bit too long in certain corners. It's usually uneventful, just the occasional late check-in or drunk guest needing help. But there's one night I'll never forget, a night that still haunts me to this day. It was a crisp autumn evening, the kind where the air feels charged with possibility. The lobby was quiet, save for the ticking of the ancient grandfather clock in the corner. I was at the front desk, scrolling through my phone to pass the time, when I heard the lobby door open. A gust of cold air swept in, carrying with it the scent of decaying leaves and something else, something old and musty. I looked up to see an elderly woman shuffling in. She was small, frail-looking, with wispy white hair and pale, almost translucent skin. Her clothes seemed oddly out of date, like something from a black and white photograph. "Good evening, ma'am," I said, putting on my best customer service smile. "How can I help you?" She approached the desk slowly, her roomy eyes fixed on me. "I'd like to check in, please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have a reservation." I nodded and turned to my computer. "Of course. May I have your name?" "Margaret Holloway," she replied. I typed the name into our system, but nothing came up. I frowned, double-checking the spelling. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Holloway, but I'm not seeing any reservation under that name. Are you sure it was for tonight?" The old woman's face crumpled in confusion. "But I always stay here, every year on this night, for the past 50 years. A chill ran down my spine. The Pinewood Inn had only been open for 30 years. I forced a smile. "Let me check again. Perhaps it's under a different name." As I pretended to search, I noticed something odd. The woman's feet didn't quite touch the ground, and when I looked closely, I could see the pattern of the carpet through her legs. My heart began to race. I blinked hard, hoping I was just tired and seeing things. But when I opened my eyes, she was still there, still slightly transparent. "I'm sorry," I stammered, "but I'm not finding any reservation. Perhaps we could set you up with a new room." The woman's eyes suddenly locked onto mine, and in that moment, they weren't the eyes of a confused old lady. They were ancient, filled with a deep, unfathomable sadness. "No," she said, her voice suddenly clear and strong. "It must be room 401. It's always room 401. My blood ran cold. Room 401 had been permanently closed for years. There had been too many incidents. Guests complaining of strange noises, unexplained cold spots, and in one terrifying instance, A man who swore he woke up to find an old woman sitting on his chest, slowly crushing the breath out of him. "I'm sorry, but that room isn't available," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Perhaps another dash." "It must be 401, the woman shrieked, her face contorting in rage. The lights in the lobby flickered, and a gust of icy wind swept through the room, scattering papers across the desk. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. The woman began to float towards me, her feet now clearly off the ground. "Every year," she hissed, "every year on the anniversary of my death, I return. And every year, someone like you tries to keep me from my room." She lunged at me, her hands, now gnarled claws, reaching for my throat. I screamed and ducked behind the desk, fumbling for the phone to call security. But when I peeked over the counter, she was gone. Shaking, I slowly stood up. The lobby was empty and still. Everything was back in its place, as if nothing had happened. But the air was ice cold, and I could still hear her last words echoing in my head. I spent the rest of that night huddled in the back office, jumping at every sound. When my relief arrived in the morning, I told them I wasn't feeling well and went home. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed. Over the next few days, I did some research into the history of the Pinewood Inn. What I found chilled me to the bone. In 1973, a woman named Margaret Holloway had indeed stayed in room 401. She was found dead the next morning, apparently from natural causes. But the coroner's report noted some anomalies. Her body was ice cold, as if she had been dead for days, and her face was frozen in an expression of utter terror. I dug deeper, and a pattern emerged. Every year, on the anniversary of Margaret's death, strange things happened at the inn. Guests reported seeing an old woman wandering the halls. Objects moved on their own. And always, there were problems with room 401. I brought my findings to the hotel manager, but he brushed me off. "Ghost stories are good for business," he said with a wink. "Adds to the charm of the place." But I knew the truth. This wasn't some harmless ghost story. This was real, and it was dangerous. I considered quitting, but something held me back. A sense of responsibility, perhaps, or maybe it was just morbid curiosity. Either way, I stayed. As the anniversary of Margaret's death approached again, I prepared myself. I stocked up on salt, sage, and other things the internet said could ward off spirits. I even convinced the manager to let me stay in room 401 that night, claiming I wanted to debunk the myths once and for all. The night started quietly enough. I sat in the room, every nerve on edge, waiting. As the clock struck midnight, the temperature plummeted. The lights flickered, then went out completely, and there she was, Margaret Holloway, standing at the foot of the bed. But this time, she wasn't angry. She looked sad. "You're the first one to stay," she said softly. "The first one to listen." We talked through the night. She told me her story, how she had come to the inn all those years ago, fleeing an abusive husband, how she had died here, alone and afraid, how all she wanted was to be remembered. As dawn broke, she began to fade. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she was gone. I like to say that was the end of it, that Margaret found peace and moved on. But the truth is, I don't know. She hasn't appeared again, at least not to me. But sometimes, late at night, I hear footsteps in the hallway outside room 401. And every year, on that same night, I make sure there's a reserved sign on the door, because I know she'll be back. She always comes back. And now, I'll be here waiting for her, ready to listen to her story once again. I've always been a night owl, so when I got the job as the night receptionist at the Crimson Peak Hotel, I thought it would be perfect. The pay was good, the work was easy, and I had plenty of quiet time to study for my online classes. The hotel itself was a bit of an oddity. A grand old building nestled in the heart of the city, its red brick facade standing out against the sleek glass and steel of the surrounding skyscrapers. It had character. The manager told me during my interview, a history that guests found charming. If only I had known then what that history really meant. It was a typically slow Tuesday night, about 3 months into my job. The hotel was almost empty, just a few business travelers and a small wedding party. I was at the front desk, half-heartedly flipping through a textbook on advanced calculus when the phone rang. "Front desk, how may I help you?" I answered automatically, stifling a yawn. There was no response, just a faint, staticky breathing on the other end. "Hello." I tried again, sitting up straighter. "Is anyone there?" The breathing got louder, more labored. Then a whisper, "Help me." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I tried to keep my voice calm and professional. "Sir? Ma'am? Are you all right? What room are you in?" "Room 513, the voice rasped. "Please hurry." I frowned. Room 513? That couldn't be right. Our hotel only had 4 floors. "I'm sorry, but there must be some mistake. We don't have a dash." The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a moment, unsettled. It must have been a prank call, I told myself. Or maybe one of the guests had been sleep-talking. Either way, I decided to do a quick round of the hotel, just to make sure everything was okay. I checked each floor, peering down the long, dimly lit hallways. Everything seemed normal. No sounds of distress, no signs of trouble. The red carpet muffled my footsteps as I walked, the old paintings on the walls seeming to watch me as I passed. I was about to head back down to the lobby when I noticed something strange. At the end of the 4th-floor hallway, where there should have been a blank wall, there was a door I'd never seen before. The number on it read 513. My heart started pounding. This wasn't possible. I'd worked here for months, walked this hallway hundreds of times. That door had never been there before. I approached it slowly, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. As I got closer, I could feel the temperature dropping. By the time I reached the door, I could see my breath misting in the air. I stood there for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Everything in me screamed to turn back, to run downstairs and call the police. But what if someone really was in trouble? Taking a deep breath, I knocked on the door. "Hello? This is the front desk. Is everything all right in there?" No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. With a trembling hand, I reached for the doorknob. It was ice cold to the touch. I turned it slowly, and the door creaked open. The room beyond was pitch black. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam illuminated a scene that turned my blood to ice. The room was decrepit, like it hadn't been used in decades. Cobwebs hung from every corner, and the air was thick with dust. But it was the far wall that made me gasp in horror. There, written in what looked horribly like dried blood, were the words, "Welcome to your room 513. Enjoy your eternal stay." And below that, scratched into the wall itself, "Help me." I stumbled backwards, my heart racing. As I did, I felt something brush against my legs. I looked down to see skeletal hands reaching out from under the bed, grasping at my ankles. I screamed and ran, slamming the door behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached the lobby, where I collapsed into my chair, shaking uncontrollably. When I finally calmed down enough to think clearly, I called the hotel manager. He arrived within the hour, a portly man in his 50s with a perpetually worried expression. I told him everything, my words tumbling out in a frantic rush. He looked at me like I was crazy, but he agreed to come up to the 4th floor with me. But when we got there, the door was gone, just a blank wall like always. The manager suggested I'd fallen asleep at the desk and had a vivid nightmare. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was all just a dream. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Over the next few weeks, I started digging into the hotel's history. What I found chilled me to the bone. The Crimson Peak Hotel had been built in the 1920s, during the height of Prohibition. It had been a popular spot for bootleggers and gangsters, a place where illegal deals were made and secrets were buried. And there were rumors whispered stories of a hidden floor where the most dangerous criminals conducted their business. A floor that officially didn't exist. I became obsessed with uncovering the truth. I spent my days off in the city archives, poring over old blueprints and newspaper clippings. I interviewed former employees, most of whom clammed up as soon as I mentioned room 513. But slowly, a picture began to emerge. In 1929, at the height of the hotel's notoriety, a gangster named Frank the Butcher Malone had used room 513 as his personal torture chamber. Rivals who crossed him would be brought there, never to be seen again. The official story was that Malone had been killed in a police raid, but the rumors told a different tale. They said that his victims had risen up against him, trapping him in his own torture chamber for all eternity. As I uncovered more of the hotel's dark past, strange things began to happen. I'd hear whispers in empty hallways, see shadows moving out of the corner of my eye, and sometimes, late at night when the hotel was quiet, I'd hear the phone ring, and every time I answered, there was nothing but that raspy breathing and that desperate whisper, "Help me, room 513. Please hurry." I never go to check anymore, but I always wonder, what if, this time, someone really does need help? What if, this time, the door reappears? And what if, one of these nights, those skeletal hands manage to grab hold of me and drag me into room 513 for my own eternal stay? I've tried to quit this job many times, but something always pulls me back. It's like the hotel has a hold on me now, like I'm a part of its dark history, and I can't help but feel that one day I'll answer that phone call, and it won't be a desperate victim on the other end. It'll be Frank the Butcher Malone himself, inviting me to join him in room 513. And on that day, I fear I won't have the strength to say no. So I stay night after night, watching the hallways and jumping at every ring of the phone. Because someone has to be here. Someone has to remember the truth about the Crimson Peak Hotel and the horrors that lurk behind its respectable facade. And maybe, just maybe, one day I'll find a way to put those restless spirits to rest and close the door to room 513 forever. But until then, I'll be here, the night receptionist at the hotel where the past never truly dies, and where some guests check in but never check out. I've been working night shifts at the Silver Pines Lodge for about a year now. It's a quaint little place nestled in the mountains, popular with hikers and nature enthusiasts. The lodge itself is a marvel of rustic architecture, all wooden beams and stone fireplaces, with a view of the misty peaks that takes your breath away. Usually, it's a peaceful job. The gentle creaking of the old building, the whisper of wind through the pines, the occasional hoot of an owl, it's all part of the charm. But what happened last week, I'm still trying to convince myself it was just a hallucination from lack of sleep. Because if it wasn't, then everything I thought I knew about reality has been turned upside down. It was a typically quiet Wednesday night. A storm was raging outside, rain lashing against the windows and wind howling through the trees. We only had a handful of guests, most of them already tucked away in their rooms. I was at the front desk, idly flipping through a dog-eared paperback, the crackle of the lobby fireplace providing a cozy counterpoint to the storm's fury. Around 2 a.m., I heard the front door open, a gust of cold, with air swept in, making me shiver. I looked up, expecting to see a late arrival, or maybe one of our guests coming back from a midnight stroll. Instead, I saw my co-worker, Sarah. Now, Sarah wasn't supposed to be here. Her shift didn't start until 8 a.m., but there she was, soaking wet, her blonde hair plastered to her face. "Sarah," I called out, confused. "What are you doing here?" She didn't respond. She just stood there, water pooling around her feet, staring at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Are you okay?" I asked, standing up. "Did something happen?" Slowly, she started walking towards the desk. There was something off about her movements. They were too fluid, almost as if she was gliding rather than walking. As she got closer, I noticed other things. Her skin seemed too pale, almost translucent, and her eyes, They didn't look right. They were too dark, too deep, like bottomless pools. "Sarah," I said again, my voice shaking slightly. "You're scaring me. What's going on?" She stopped right in front of the desk, her gaze never leaving my face. Then, in a voice that sounded nothing like Sarah's, she spoke. "I'm here to relieve you." A chill ran down my spine. "What? No! Your shift doesn't start for hours." She tilted her head at an unnatural angle, her neck cracking loudly in the quiet lobby. "I'm here to relieve you," she repeated, her voice now a gurgling whisper. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. "You're not Sarah," I said, reaching for the phone. "I'm calling the police." But before I could dial, her hand shot out impossibly fast and grabbed my wrist. Her touch was ice cold and slimy. I tried to pull away, but her grip was like iron. "I'm here to relieve you," she said again, her mouth stretching into a wide, inhuman grin. Her teeth were sharp, too many of them crammed into her mouth. I screamed then, finally finding my voice. I wrenched my hand free and ran for the back office, slamming the door behind me and locking it. For hours, I huddled in that tiny room, listening to the thing that wasn't Sarah moving around in the lobby. Sometimes it would come to the door, scratching and whispering, "Let me in. I'm here to relieve you." When the first rays of dawn finally started to peek through the window, I heard the front door open again. There were voices, actual human voices. The morning shift was arriving. Cautiously, I opened the office door. The lobby was empty, everything in its place. There was no sign of the creature that had terrorized me all night. I rushed out, babbling my story to my confused co-workers. They looked at me like I was crazy. One of them called Sarah, the real Sarah, who was at home, sound asleep. She had no idea what I was talking about. They all think I had some kind of breakdown from the stress of night shifts. Maybe they're right. Maybe it was all in my head. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something truly horrifying had happened. Over the next few days, I started noticing things. Small things at first. Objects moved from where I'd left them. Cold spots in the lobby. The faint smell of decay that would come and go. Then the guests started complaining. They reported strange noises in the night, unexplained shadows, a feeling of being watched. One guest swore he saw a woman standing at the foot of his bed, her body twisted at impossible angles. I knew I had to do something. I started researching, digging into the history of the Silver Pines Lodge and the surrounding area. What I found chilled me to the bone. The land where the lodge stands was once sacred ground to the indigenous people of the area. They believed it was a thin place, a spot where the veil between our world and the spirit world was weakest. They had rituals and safeguards to keep malevolent entities from crossing over. But when the land was taken and the lodge was built, those protections were destroyed, and something had been waiting for its chance to slip through. I realized then what had really happened that stormy night. The thing I saw wasn't Sarah. It was something pretending to be her, a changeling, a shapeshifter, a spirit that had crossed over and was now trying to take her place. And it wasn't just after Sarah. It was after all of us. I tried to warn my co-workers, but they didn't believe me. The manager threatened to fire me if I kept scaring the guests with ghost stories. But I knew I couldn't stop. Lives were at stake. I started leaving protective charms around the lodge, sachets of herbs, iron nails, symbols drawn in blessed salt. I learned protection rituals and performed them in secret during my shifts. For a while, it seemed to work. The complaints stopped. The strange occurrences ceased. I started to hope that maybe, just maybe, I had succeeded in driving the entity away. But then, last night, it happened again. I was at the front desk when the door opened, and there was Sarah, or rather, the thing pretending to be Sarah. But this time, it wasn't alone. Behind it stood twisted, shadowy versions of all my co-workers, their faces stretched into inhuman grins. "We're here to relieve you," they said in unison, their voices a horrifying chorus. I ran, I ran out of the lodge and didn't stop until I reached the town at the foot of the mountain. And now, as I sit in this 24-hour diner, my hands shaking as I write this down, I know what I have to do. I have to go back. I have to find a way to close the door between worlds, to send these things back where they came from. Because if I don't, it's only a matter of time before they spread beyond the lodge, taking over more people, destroying more lives. So I'll go back to the Silver Pines Lodge, back to the night shift, and I'll face whatever comes through that door. Because someone has to stand guard. Someone has to protect the unsuspecting guests and staff. Someone has to face the horrors that lurk in the shadows of the night. And God help me, that someone is me. I don't work night shifts anymore. I can't, because I know that one of these nights, that thing wearing Sarah's face will come back. And next time, I might not be able to escape. Next time, it might succeed in relieving me. And then, God help us all, it will be me standing at the front desk, waiting for the next unsuspecting victim to walk through the door. So I stay away, but I can never truly leave. The Silver Pines Lodge has become a part of me now. Its dark secret a burden I must bear. And every night, as I lie awake in my bed, I wonder, who's working the night shift now? And are they human or something else? I've always considered myself a rational person. Ghosts, monsters, things that go bump in the night. They were just stories to me. That is, until I started working the night shift at the Evergreen Grand Hotel. Now, I'm not so sure what I believe anymore. The Evergreen Grand is one of those old-world luxury hotels, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers. It stands in the heart of the city, a monument to a bygone era of elegance and sophistication. But beneath its glittering surface, there's something off, something that sends shivers down your spine when you walk through its halls late at night. It was about 3 months into my job when it happened. The hotel was unusually quiet that night, with only a handful of guests checked in. I was at the front desk, idly flipping through a magazine when the phone rang. Front desk, how may I assist you? I answered automatically. There was a moment of silence. Then a man's voice came through, sounding confused and slightly panicked. I think there's something wrong with my room. I sat up straighter, immediately on alert. I'm sorry to hear that, sir. What seems to be the problem? It's the mirrors, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. They're wrong. I frowned. Wrong? How do you mean, sir? They don't reflect right. My reflection, it's not moving when I move. And its eyes, they're all wrong. Please, can you send someone up? A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to keep my voice calm and professional. Of course, sir. What's your room number? Room 712, he replied. I froze. Room 712? That couldn't be right. Our hotel only had 6 floors. I'm sorry, sir, but there must be some mistake. We don't have a room 712. There was a long pause. When the man spoke again, his voice was trembling. What do you mean? I'm in room 712 right now. I can see the number on the door. My heart started racing. Something was very, very wrong here. Sir, please stay calm. I'm going to come up and check on you myself. Can you tell me what floor you're on? The 7th floor, he said, sounding more confused by the second. I took the elevator up here myself. How can you say there's no 7th floor? I was about to respond when I heard a noise in the background, a sound like glass cracking. The man gasped. Oh, God, he whispered. The mirror. Something's coming through the mirror. There was a scream, a crash, and then the line went dead. My hands shaking. I immediately called security. They searched the entire hotel, floor by floor, room by room. But they found nothing out of the ordinary. No sign of any disturbance, and certainly no 7th floor or room 712. I tried to convince myself it was just a prank call, some bored guest trying to scare the night receptionist. But deep down, I knew it was something more. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things. Guests complaining about strange reflections in their mirrors. maids refusing to clean certain rooms because of an oppressive feeling. And sometimes, late at night, I could swear I heard the elevator moving past the 6th floor up to a level that shouldn't exist. I became obsessed with uncovering the truth. I spent my days off in the city archives, researching the hotel's history. What I found was disturbing. The Evergreen Grand had been built in the 1920s by a man named Ezra Blackwood. Blackwood was rumored to be involved in the occult, and there were whispers that he had incorporated dark magic into the very fabric of the hotel. According to the stories, Blackwood had created a secret 7th floor, a floor that existed outside of normal space and time. It was said to be a place where he conducted his arcane experiments, trying to breach the boundaries between worlds. But something had gone wrong. On the night the hotel opened, Blackwood disappeared. He was never seen again. As I dug deeper, I found more recent reports, stories of guests and staff members vanishing without a trace over the years. Always on the night of the full moon, always last seen near a mirror. A week after the incident with room 712, I was working another night shift when a guest checked in late. As I handed him his key, I noticed something odd about his eyes. They seemed off somehow. Too dark, too deep. "I hope you enjoy your stay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is there anything else you need?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just one thing," he said. "Could you tell me how to get to the 7th floor?" My blood ran cold. Before I could respond, he turned and walked to the elevator. I watched, paralyzed with fear, as he stepped inside and the doors closed behind him. The elevator started to move, the numbers above it lighting up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then impossibly 7. I never saw that guest again. The security cameras showed him entering the elevator, but there was no footage of him ever leaving the hotel. Since then, I've been on high alert. I've started noticing patterns. The way certain guest reflections seem to linger in mirrors after they've walked away. The strange symbols hidden in the decorative moldings around the hotel. The way the air seems to thicken around certain mirrors, as if something is pressing against them from the other side. I've tried to warn my co-workers, but they think I'm losing my mind. Maybe I am, but I can't shake the feeling that something is coming. Something that's been waiting for nearly a century, trapped behind the mirrors on a floor that shouldn't exist. Sometimes, late at night when the hotel is quiet, I think I can hear sounds coming from the elevator shaft, the whir of machinery moving up past the 6th floor, to a level that shouldn't exist. And sometimes, when I look in the mirrors in the lobby, I catch a glimpse of something in the reflection, a hallway I don't recognize, a door with the number 712, and behind that door I see a face with eyes that are all wrong, staring back at me, waiting. I've tried to quit this job many times, but something always draws me back. I'm starting to think that once you've seen what lies beyond the mirrors, once you've heard the whispers from the 7th floor, you can never truly leave the Evergreen Grand Hotel. So I stay, night after night, watching the elevator and avoiding the mirrors. And I wonder, how long until whatever's up there decides to come down to our world? And when it does, will anyone believe me when I try to warn them? Because I know now that the stories are true. There is a 7th floor in the Evergreen Grand, a floor of mirrors and madness, where the laws of reality don't apply. And one day, when the stars align and the barriers between worlds are at their weakest, those mirrors will shatter. And what comes through, well, I pray I'm not here to see it, but I know I will be, because someone has to stand guard. Someone has to remember the truth about the Evergreen Grand and the horrors that lurk behind its glittering facade. So if you ever find yourself staying at our hotel, do me a favor. Stay away from the mirrors. Don't look too closely at your reflection. And whatever you do, don't answer if you hear a phone ringing in the middle of the night. Because in the Evergreen Grand, not all guests are human. And some check in, but never check out.